following program is available in high definition on Channel 700. This program is designed and produced by the community with the support of TV Cogeco.
Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. This is a local television show that gets into the issues and the concerns that matter to Oakville residents, and we can only do this thanks to the service that we receive in our community from Cogeco, the cable TV provider for our area. And you can watch us on cable channel 23, and if you prefer higher definition, cable channel 700. And today, talking about the way we're going to deal with infill pressures that are bothering all the neighborhoods in our town. I'm joined by three men who have invested a fair amount of their private time and their personal time on behalf of their residents associations into this matter. We have Don Cox, who's from the Coronation Park Residents Association. We've got Michael Mulroy, who's the treasurer of the Joshua Creek Residents Association, the one I used to lead, and David Mallen, the leader of the Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association. You know, when I was the president of Joshua Creek, we used to wonder which was older, Trafalgar Chartwell or Joshua Creek. Joshua Creek claimed to have started in the 70s under pressure from some crazy proposal by the cement plant to do something horrible to the environment. And does Trafalgar Chartwell stretch so far back that you don't actually know when it started?
We know it was 1987, and we've just celebrated our 30th year. Michael,
you may have bragging rights. You may have bragging rights. And Don, Coronation Park started, I want to say 11 or 12 years ago?
That's right, about 2006, yes.
So only 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago, yes.
And it was a fantasy event, as I recall.
Fantasy food market disappeared, and the developers came in and wanted to do something to the site, and that caused the neighbors to say, we'd like to have a say in this.
So literally, your group was instigated by infill problems, and Trafalgar Chartwell and Joshua Creek have been kept alive by the need to be vigilant about bad infill projects. And I think we would all agree that we do believe there's such a thing as a good infill project. We just don't see them as often as we'd like to. Would we find that is that a good base to start from?
That's great.
I think so.
So the big change in Oakville when it comes to infill was meant to be the 2010 adoption of the Livable Oakville official plan, which for the first time set out to protect stable residential neighborhoods, i.e. deal with infill issues. And this is the famous Section 11. There's been a terrific improvement in the way the planning staff have related to infill applications, because they're now remembering to read and quote Section 11 when they evaluate, does the project fit the intent and purpose of the official plan? But we're now in the middle of the start of the obligatory review of the official plan, which you have to do every 5 years. And the question we should be asking ourselves is Section 11 good enough? And what do we need to do to change it? So, Michael, you or someone from Joshua Creek has been going to every Committee of Adjustment meeting for a long time now.
Yes.
So you see a parade or the river of infill applications, because that's really the main business of the committee. Have you got, has Joshua Creek got suggestions for changing Section 11 yet?
Well, we think the protection of especially the stable neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood, is what we're looking at most carefully, because that's what our members seem to want. They want to see, the uniqueness of the neighborhood respected. We're not against development, but that it should proceed so that there are no surprises, or at least they're kept to a minimum, so that people can appreciate that development's going to happen, and the new development will fit in with the character of the existing neighborhood.
So certainly Section 11 sets out to do that very thing, but now's the time to figure out how it needs, if it needs to be changed at all, because I don't think everybody's satisfied yet with the result, because stuff is still getting through. David, what about TCRA? What's your view on that?
Well, we're very much in support of 1119, which is the section that endeavours to support stable residential neighbourhoods. We are, however, I must say, somewhat disappointed with how this has been applied historically. We would like to see it applied much more religiously, for want of a better phrase, and we would like to communicate to developers that their developments are welcome, provided they respect both the zoning bylaws and respect the intent of 1119, which is to protect the stable residential neighbourhoods and assure consistent development with what's there today.
So Don, I know that your group's been involved at a kind of a small subdivision level in dealing with some of the features of the issues in these infill projects. Tend to be how far apart the houses are and how much lot coverage there is. And you've recently been involved in a small subdivision fight or debate, I don't know what to characterize it, but anyway, a process where those have been key issues. I guess what I'm trying to get at is 1119 sets out to do these things, but I'm not sure that it's getting there, and I'm looking for ideas for how it might be tightened. There is a way to proceed that would well, let me put it this way. I often hear, why can't they build within what the zoning provides? Why do they have to have more? Well, a way we could make that happen almost overnight is there's no one has a right to a minor variance. You can only get a minor variance if your municipality passes a bylaw, part of the official plan, that says you can and sets up a committee, either council itself or a committee of adjustment, to handle the applications. If we abolished minor variances, which is within our power, nobody could do this. Your infill things would be limited to just what the zoning is. And maybe at that point we should shift, if we did that, we would shift to making sure the zoning suited us, because one of the things the zoning has been exposed to create as a problem is in some neighborhoods, the distance between the homes is greater than what the zoning allows. The zoning allows them to be closer together than they actually are. If you could say the neighborhood's underbuilt to the zoning permissions that are laid over the neighborhood. And in every case I've seen this year, the worst issue or the unhappiest issue has been the closing of the space between the homes. And to fix that, we would need to go during the official plan. We'd want to make sure we had a policy that said we wanted to preserve the gap between homes, and then we'd go in and fix the zoning to do that by reducing the amount that we permitted these side setbacks to take. How do each of you feel about that? Which way should we go?
If I give my comments on that, yes, you're right. Our association has been involved in a couple of OMB cases where the developer has come in and wanted to build a development that exceeded the bylaws by significant amounts. In fact, wanted to change the bylaws to a different number that would allow them to do more intense development, and then also modify those new proposed bylaws. I guess the way we look at it is we have these so-called stable neighborhoods that have been built over the last 30, 40, 50 years, and they've been built well within the bylaws, as you've so indicated. Extremely large setbacks, extremely large front, side, and rear setbacks, which gives you greater distance to the house behind. Heights that are less than the bylaw. The bylaw says a specific number, and typically the heights are less than that. There's been development in the area that we represent, but by and large, almost totally, I'd say it's within the bylaw. So the neighbors are very, very responsible. The neighbors in that neighborhood are very responsible in saying, we want larger homes, but we respect the bylaws and we'll build to the bylaws. And then we have developers come in and essentially say, will buy the property because this property is very valuable. Look at the lovely neighborhood. They can sell homes in this neighborhood because of the lovely area. And then, by the way, we would like to build something different in our area from what the rest of the area is. Well, that's the thing that bothers us.
Well, because
Okay?
it amounts to creeping destruction of the neighborhood.
Exactly. So what happens is, where you have a stable neighborhood, by agreeing to this erosion, if I could use that term, it becomes unstable. So our approach has been, for the last two OMB cases, and we think it's a good approach, that's our way we're going, is we have bylaws. The neighborhood has been built within the bylaws, well within the bylaws, and they talk about the technical things of lot coverage and FAR and all the rest of it. And the numbers are well within those. So what has established the character for the neighborhood is me building within the bylaws, road allowances that are extremely wide. We don't even have storm sewers in a number of locations. We don't have curbs. That's what creates a character in a neighborhood. Okay. Now when we get something new in, and then they argue, well, we want to enhance it, that's not an enhancement. That's changing the character of the neighborhood. So our approach has been, build within the bylaw. We know building within the bylaw will allow them to build something bigger than the surrounding area. But as long as they build within the bylaw, we will support it.
Do you want the bylaw tightened any?
Very much. Like, our sense would be, if the bylaw had at least as much strength as the official plan, that would be very valuable, because it's the bylaw that establishes the character of the neighborhood, not the official plan.
Actually,
okay?
the form that's built in the neighborhood, a lot of people and a lot of planners would agree, I think, the character of the neighborhood is established by what's actually built there, not by what the bylaw could permit you to build there.
Right.
And in many neighborhoods, we're seeing the bylaw permits narrow setbacks and 2 stories, and and the actual character of the neighborhood is wide setbacks and bungalows.
Yeah.
And so if you just build within the bylaw in those neighborhoods, you destroy that neighborhood. Or if you wish, you I won't call it destroy it, but you totally transform it into a completely different kind of neighborhood. And so the question I'm chasing as I go about trying to consult like this and in public and at AGMs is, do we need to tighten the zoning permissions?
All right.
And as for the strength of the bylaw gets its strength from the official plan. So if the official plan has a clear policy for the area, the zoning bylaw has to conform to the official plan. And when they do, they're very strong. We have discovered that, in the Planning Act it says that the zoning bylaw must conform upward to the official plan. We had a neighborhood where we had, in the official plan, we allowed up to 4 stories in a particular area, and in the zoning bylaw, we held it down to 3, thinking, well, we had a broad area, and we thought overall 4 was right, but in this particular area, we thought 3 was better. Well, the developer who bought that land appealed us to the board, and the board said, your official plan says up to 4. He wants up to 4. He gets up to 4. If you don't like it, fix your bylaw. So we're now engaged in, as part of the 5-year review, going through the official plan and the zoning to see where those gaps are to close them.
And that's a good point, because right now in the official plan, for instance, the area that we represent, largely RO2, I believe in the official plan it says you can have X to Y number of homes per hectare. And then the bylaw further refines that and makes it less. Well, if they build to the official plan, it totally changes the character of the neighborhood. Yeah. If they build to the bylaw, it will still change it somewhat. But a good first step would be at least to not ask for exceptions to the bylaw. But I agree with you, if they built according to the existing homes in the area, it would provide even more side setback and more front setback. But at least we should be building to the bylaw. Yeah.
Okay,
for starters.
So I'm hearing that as we need to tighten more to protect the existing built form, and that will mean changing the OP and the zoning. So what will happen is it's a two-step process. First you change the OP, then you bring the zoning into conformity.
This is exactly what I wanted to pick up on, is that our experience, our area typically is smaller homes on larger lots. Developers buy the lot because it's an older home and there's lots of opportunity to build a much bigger house on it. This results in much larger homes on the same size lots. Our concern first and foremost is that in many cases the developer looks for a variance to the zoning bylaw. Mm-hmm. If we could have a phase one, if you like, in this process that you speak of, we would like to see first and foremost that as a minimum the zoning bylaw is enforced. Secondly, perhaps as a phase two, we can start to talk with the planners in the official plan review about what is meant by the character of the neighbourhood and how we can go beyond the rigours of the zoning bylaw to maintain and sustain the character of the neighbourhood.
Well, I've come to believe that the character is absolutely defined by the built form that you find.
Yes.
And the zoning, if it describes in measurable terms what is on the ground, then they're in sync. And if the zoning bylaw permits more, they're not in sync and you're inviting change. And I'm taking you for having just said, I'm just checking to see if I got it right, that you might be sympathetic to the idea of cutting, at least temporarily, abolishing the Committee of Adjustment so that people are forced to stick to the zoning and they can't ask for more, because that's the ultimate effect of it. You can still ask for more by applying for a zoning bylaw amendment, but that's a longer and more expensive process, and it would deter a lot of people. There are people, though, who believe that there's odd-shaped lots and the owner needs consideration for a little tweak here and there. That's what minor variances were originally meant to be for, only for showing consideration for the poor soul who had an unusual lot and needed just a little adjustment. And in that little flap of the tent, the whole camel has been going through. And the question that's animating our entire community is, how do we get the camel out of the tent?
Yes,
Mike, what about you?
Well, I think that you're really addressing how has the Committee of Adjustment been functioning historically, and it's sort of the floodgate concern. You know, once you make one variance and you approve it, then you've opened the floodgates, and this is what has happened at certain neighborhoods.
Then they start calling it a neighborhood in transition, and there's no rules.
And it all stops there. But, you know, you do, you know, throwing out the Committee of Adjustment in its entirety may be, you know, a bad idea of throwing out, you know, a system that was designed to allow an individual homeowner easy access to that, resolve a narrow issue. And it's like all legal situations that if the law develops in an area that allows for greater variances and approval on a much, let's say, a less stringent method, then you've got that unfortunate situation. Well, do you get rid of the body who's making the decisions, or do you encourage the body to change its decision making and shift its priority to protecting the character of the neighborhood?
We have to change
I see
the
that
rules.
as a possibility.
If you want to keep the committee, we clearly have to change the zoning and the OP to tell them what we want them to do. And it's been a long struggle to get, I mean, for 10 years I've been changing the Committee of Adjustment, trying to make it more sensitive to neighborhoods, and it's only...
You've had a lot of recent success, I'd say.
Well, we
noticed that.
I have to say, it's third time lucky. We finally got a planning director who seems to get Oakville, and so
I support that comment.
Yeah.
that may be what's happened here. There was before we found this one, I got to the point where I didn't think that one might not exist.
Well, I think you found the right man here. You certainly.
And
but just coming back to this business of the minor variances, unfortunately, and I know you're a lawyer, Mike, so don't take this personally.
He was so generous and kind about, people who need help from the Committee of Adjustment. I was thinking, you must be a lawyer.
But the minor variance process has unfortunately become a Trojan horse, in as much as under the guise of minor variance in issues that were resolved actually in Toronto much more than in Oakville, the minor variance has received a legal meaning which is quite contrary to the common meaning that we would assign to it, and that's where this process has somewhat gone adrift. And our view of it is we need to get back to the issue of the zoning bylaws, make sure they're enforced, and then perhaps go beyond that and start to think about changes to zoning bylaws, changes to the official plan to better reflect the community as it exists.
Well, we've been given a new tool by the province in Bill 73, which is, it's gone all the way to royal assent, but it hasn't been proclaimed. And it allows us to create local definitions. It allows us to add defining points to the concept of what a minor impact is. And the stuff, what I've learned over the last 10 years is the planning world and the OMB world construe minor variance, or and it must be minor. They take it for not the size but the impact. So if you're doing something major on your property but no one can see it, it's hard to argue that it has impact. That's the way it's normally used at the board. And I remember, also at the committee, I remember when I was leading Joshua Creek going along and complaining about a 33% variance, and actually won the point by shaming them that, who on this planet can call 33% of anything minor?
Right.
And I was later, and so despite the success, which held, I was later upbraided for this, crazed concept when it was really supposed to be impact, not measurement. And so I returned that I thought measurement was a good proxy for impact.
Yeah.
So we're also going to get, I think, some significant OMB reforms later this year. At least I've been led by the minister responsible to believe that we will. And I'm out arguing for 7 key reforms to the OMB, and I'm going to be writing some op-ed things to try to whip up support for it. And I hope that when you see them, you'll write letters and clippings and send them to the ministry and say, yes, what he said. So how would you advise us to enact these guiding principles to the Committee of Adjustment to define minor? And Mike, since we know you're a lawyer, why don't we start with you?
Well, we do think that, as you say, that the concept of minor doesn't make a lot of sense to the average person. We think minor is small, and obviously it's a much more complex issue from a planning perspective. But we are comforted by the fact that it's not just minor. It's whether the development, there are several tests that have to be met under the Planning Act, and if only one isn't met, the application isn't successful. And one that we find is very helpful and has recently been supported by planning department here is whether the development's appropriate for the neighborhood. And that's very consistent with the concept of character of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I think that concept could be used, as you say, not just to build within the bylaw, but then add the component of, well, what is it going to look like? What is the build form going to look like sitting in the midst of all the existing neighborhood? And that's whether it's going to be appropriate or not. That's a very layman concept, which I think Committee of Adjustment can turn to, as well as supported turning to the official plan in the bylaw. And I think there's some hope there that can't be refuted, and that will help development. Maybe these issues, as you say, in a neighborhood where it's all bungalows, can you actually use that as a tool to say that we really have to look very carefully at then the height and type of development that goes in there? Mike's
referring to the third test, which is it desirable and appropriate for the property? And it's the prepositional phrase "for the property" that's attached to the test that gives me trouble, because we all want to apply this third test in a contextual way, and we want to say "for the property" can't chop off a reference to the environment that it sits in, but the English sentence does stop at the end of the prepositional phrase. And in this OMB case that we lost on Culsa Gate, it's called, where the OP said 4 and the zoning said 3, and the board said he's got a right to that gap there. I'm concerned that the desirable and appropriate for the property would be there'd be a gap between it and what the zoning allowed, and we'd see the board go, nope, you can go all the way up to here. And that's why I've been attacking. We need to fix the OP, and we need to bring the zoning down, and then we'll have the 3 of them in sync. The great learning. I mean, we've made great progress over the last 10 years. We really did, in terms of Livable Oakville's plan. But we've learned a great number of things about how this crazy system works, and these, I'm going to call it closing the gaps, really looks to me like an essential next step to get to preserve the Oakville that we want to keep.
Yep. So I was going to say, I guess one of the issues that would need to be addressed in that is if the official plan has a statement about, say, low density housing, say that's what it is, and defines low density as a range of X to Y homes per hectare. And then you have zoning below that, some of which is at the high end of that and some of which is at the low end of that, bylaw zoning below that. Then how do you get the strength in the official plan to say you must follow the bylaw for everything that's below that? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm thinking somehow you have to have that in there, or the zones that say the low end of that will not survive a test that says the official plan is this.
Yes.
That's the problem.
So let me try on you in the minute that's left. This is what our new planning director is saying to that very point. He says, because of the science of mapping being so good nowadays with GIS and everything, instead of really broad areas and when you go so broad, you wind up with these anomalies, or these exceptions. We should map the town more tightly. And we'll have far more zones, let's say,
for the official plan.
Yeah.
I like that.
So
I think that's helpful.
That's a good idea, but I'd just like to make the point that all of our communities, I believe, share one thing in common, and that is our population is really concerned about where we live, how we live, and the communities that we live in, and don't want to see it change too much. And that's really what's driving this whole effort here.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very clear that as the OMB said in the famous 1978 decision, Oakville doesn't like change. And, in a perfect world, we'll be a Don Henley song where change comes slowly if it ever comes at all. I'm quoting the master in one of my favorite songs. Don and Mike and Dave, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for joining us. This is a conversation we need to have all across the town, and I know it is going on. Please be in touch, and let's get this right. Thanks for joining us. See you again.